Hola mis queridos audiófilos y locos. Ahora mismo les voy a traer la entrevista que hice con Wendell Diller, el director de mercadeo de Magnepan. Él lleva como 40 años trabajando con Magnepan, así que si alguien conoce la compañía bien, es Wendell y tuvimos una charla muy amena. Desgraciadamente, por lo mucho que se dijo, no voy a poder hacer los subtítulos porque de verdad me tomaría muchas horas hacerlo manualmente. Pero mientras tanto, recuerden que podemos utilizar la manera con los subtítulos se puede hacer. Así que espero me perdonen. Yo creo que la mayoría de ustedes hablan o entienden inglés. Espero lo disfruten. Buenas noches, amigos audiófilos. Estoy aquí con Wendell Diller de la compañía Magnepan en Minnesota, los fabricantes de las grandes planar magnéticas. Good evening, Wendell. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about the company, about Magnepan. How long have you been there?
Well, I've been marketing Magnaplaners for 47 years. The company's been in business for 50 years.
It's known all over the world.
It's an amazing facility when you consider this huge factory sole job is producing flat panel speakers. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world. It's quite an amazing facility. I think you could see some of the photos from the factory on our website, or more. We could send out more photos if you're interested.
Yes, I have seen them. And of course, speaking of special and nothing like in the world, well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the LRSs, which I have here, courtesy of Magnepan. And
Yes,
I have to say they're simply unique because the price ratio. I mean, what they give you, they really, as they say, they punch above their weight in terms of the economic scale.
that's correct. I don't know if it's politically correct. We have used terms like appetizer.
Oh yeah,
There's other terms we could use, but it may not be appropriate. But how do you get people hooked on our technology? Well, you give them a wonderful deal on a high performance, small version of the large speakers. I don't want to sound like a salesman. Well, I'm not a salesman. I like marketing. Sales is not my thing. In fact, that was in college. I took an interest aptitude test, and my highest scores were in electronics and mechanical. Guess my lowest score, sales. So I don't naturally take to sales. I love marketing because it's strategic, and I like talking about marketing. But it's not real. I don't think it's totally correct to say they're easier to place. Now, you get really weighed into the technical side of it. It does not excite the resonances in a room the way a box speaker can. So that's a plus. The minus is that because it's a dipole, it interacts with the room more than a monopole, which makes it more challenging. So yeah. It's I would say it's more correct to say it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was trying to say, that they don't react with the room so much. They don't interact, so you don't hear a lot of boominess like you would on a normal speaker. I know about dipoles because I have two pair of quads here. So, and speaking of quads, you have a very funny campaign for the LRS in which it says, when I grow up, I want to be like a quad.
Yes, well, that is obviously we all of us at Magnepan, we like dipole speakers, whether electrostat or ribbon, because they're related. They're cousins. So we respect a great, the quad has become a legend, and so it's a left-handed compliment to say that we would like this product to be thought of as a successor to the quad, because it's got many of the same type of characteristics that people have always loved about quads speakers. I mean, I don't know that the younger generation probably doesn't even know what we're talking about. But those of us that grew up with speakers like quad electrostats would know what it does so well compared to other speakers back in the 50s and 60s. It was ahead of its time.
Well, the founder of Magnepan owned electrostatic speakers, as I understand.
That's correct. KLH9s. And I remember my first experience hearing a KLH9 in college. It's like, wow, that's different. I mean, I recognized immediately that it did something with live acoustical music that, especially in orchestra, that I just couldn't get out of a box speaker.
Actually, it's funny because recently I had here a new old stock Crown amplifier. It was a 300, DC 300, which were known to be used with those KLHs back in the day. And unfortunately, I sold it, so I would have liked to try with the LRSs because they're supposed to be good with Magnepans too. I don't know.
Well, the Magneplaners all, as a category, high current amplifiers that can double their power at 4 ohms, AB amplifiers have traditionally been the favorite. And Crown was one of those. But, you know, I don't get to listen or don't have the time to listen to amplifiers like I used to. So I know as a category, that Class AB amplifiers that double their power at 4 ohms tend to sound better on ribbon speakers.
Actually, speaking of, continuing the theme of amplifiers, I read a lot before I got this pair for review. I read a lot that it was very picky on the amplifiers and that you really have to have a very expensive amplifier to try it. But, you know, I use it with a variety of amplifiers here. I use it with the Quad 405.2. I use it with a pair of Meridian mono amps. I even use it with my Pioneer integrated amplifier. And of course, here I have a Paz Labs 150.8. And all of them were able to make a satisfactory sound. I don't think they're that difficult to drive. Of course, for the part where the amplifier needs to double into 4 ohms. Yes, that's important.
Well, again, truth in advertising. It is a more difficult entry-level speaker than anything we've done in the past. The thinking back in the old days was, how can we get kids started? A college kid, the speaker was designed to take it easy on that inexpensive receiver or integrated amplifier back in the 80s and the early days. So it was a relatively benign, easy load. The LRS is a departure. So it requires a serious amplifier, something that will produce more power at 4 ohms compared to 8 ohms. So you can put some inexpensive receivers on it and you will hear a difference. It just is going to ask more from the amplifier.
So when you say that it requires a better amplifier, you're talking about the sonic capabilities, you know, how far you can take it into the world of real high end. It's not that it's not going to work, it's just not going to sound its best.
Yeah, but I think what we're being upfront and on our website saying this will challenge an amplifier. It doesn't mean it has to be an expensive amplifier, but even if it's a little receiver or integrated amp, ideally it should produce more power at 4 ohms to meet the current demands that the LRS places on an amplifier, which is a change in our thinking from the last 50 years. Now, we know when you get up to the larger models, more expensive models, we know the customer is probably going to have that kind of amplifier. But this is a departure in terms of you need an amplifier with a serious power supply to drive the LRS. It does ask more, but consumers seem to, we're not having problems or complaints. They notice when they put a better amplifier on it. I don't mean more expensive. I mean an amplifier that has a serious power supply.
And of course, this follows the principle of a lot of audiophiliacs, which is the hierarchy, where the source is the most important, and then the preamp and the amp have to be really important. And so the speaker is not as important as the source. So if somebody wants to spend really good money on a source and really good money on an amp, then they can save money by getting the LRS, and they're still going to get that sound, that high end.
Now, I want to challenge your logic chain. The source is the most important. I would say the way I look at it is a balanced. Where do you apportion your money? It is a statement that if the source is bad, everything downstream is going to be adversely affected. That's pretty obvious.
Yeah, starting with the microphone.
But I think the bigger issue for a consumer is where do I put my budget? How do I apportion my budget? Yes. And that takes a comprehensive look at everything from the source to the loudspeaker. So the LRS is $650 US, continental US. What's the proper, how much should I budget for the amplifier in terms of cost? That's where you, the reviewer, come in and have to give advice of what percentage of my budget should I put into an amplifier or source, or for that matter, cables and speaker wires, everything that's involved.
Yes, well, I mean, I would personally spend more money on a turntable and a nice cartridge, and they get a very decent amplifier or a very high current integrator amp, and then I will save money by buying the LRS, because for the price they're unbeatable. So you will already have a very strong start out of the gate, and then eventually, because you already have a strong system, you could upgrade them to the 0.7s or the 1.7s or
we're right up front saying that we don't care which magneplaner you get, because we know if we can get a magneplaner in your home, statistically, the probability that you will buy a better model eventually. So the LRS is a good hook.
I see. Do you offer some sort of a upgrade path or the dealers for the LRS?
No, there's no. This is, think of it more like a lost leader. It's not really, to be truthful, it's not a lost leader, but we're not trying to make a big profit on the LRS. This is to get young people in particular, started into high-end audio.
They do challenge the quads in many ways. I agree.
Part of the marketing strategy is due to the I don't know, should I say collapse of the dealer network? From my perspective, it seems like brick and mortar dealers are going to become obsolete. Now, that I don't believe that, but if you look at the 1970s and 1980s, every little town had at least one stereo store.
Yeah.
Now, and by the way, there weren't very many. I think back then, what were the high-end products in the 1970s?
Macintosh, Fisher, Advent, or Japanese.
There were very few relative to the situation today. is the proliferation of high-end products and the lack of the inability to hear the product. It's quite ironic. We don't know where this is headed, but now, especially with the pandemic, we expect to lose more two-channel audio stores. And it's like, how are you going to hear? Are you going to buy a big panel speaker from reading or listening to videos, watching videos, or reading reviews? No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
You have until you heard in the old days, you heard a quad or a KLH9 electrostatic, or you heard a magneplanar, and you became a fan of dipole speakers. Well, now we have a problem of you can't hear them anywhere. Well, it's not. It's headed to the direction of will you be able to hear a dipole speaker in your city? So it's quite alarming, the trend that we're on, and the LRS provides a means of solving that where, okay, try it. It's very easy to, for 60 days, it can be shipped by UPS. If it turns out you don't care for it, if you think this is all hype, no problem, send it back.
Well, let's get to that point and get it towards my audience, because I have a big group of people in the United States, but also in Mexico, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, and there's another group in Spain, but you do have distributors in Spain. So I was wondering if somebody in Argentina or Chile wants to buy a pair of LRSs, what are their options? Can they buy it directly? Can they buy directly from you?
No, we don't ship outside of the U.S. And it gets so complicated trying to sell an inexpensive product into another country. It's just not feasible. The only solution, long-term solution we can think of, is that the distributors will set up a similar program as we have here in the United States, and we're working on that. It will not be exactly the same as what we're able to offer, but we need the same concept around the world. China, Russia, all the other places where we have distributors, we need a similar program, and experimentation is our distributors are beginning to work on that problem to see how they can provide an LRS type of concept in their markets.
Yes, because if you say that the brick and mortar stores are shrinking, we need to find a way to distribute this easily in a global market.
That's correct.
I know that people out there are very interested in Latin America, so you must have at least one or two dealers in Latin America.
Well, we have a few distributors, and it's all very early. Right now, we have a production. We can't fill the demand for the LRS in the United States. It caught us by surprise. We didn't really expect this.
And the purpose of the LRS was, of course, to introduce young people to the world of Magnepans and high-end. But also, I understand that the LRS contains new technology not previously seen on other Magnepans. Is that correct?
There are some new ideas that we were using on the more expensive models that it was incorporated into the LRS. But I would say that it's probably more accurate to say we took a different look at the problem of an entry-level speaker and gambled, I would say. We took a risk. This needs a serious amplifier with a good power supply. Is that going to come back and bite us later? Now, it worked out great. It could have been a strategic mistake. People are maybe concerned about the economy or their jobs. but they're at home. They can't go on vacations. They can't spend money on the usual things. So $650, yeah, why not? So they're doing it.
Well, I guess I better keep these and buy them from you because otherwise it would be impossible to get them.
If you weren't a reviewer, we'd make you wait.
Well, I have to say again, I don't think the amplifier issue is that big of a deal because today you can get so many choices in amplification, and most amplifiers have decent power supplies now, even in the low scale of prices. And there's also the Class D amplification, which is prodigious in terms of power, and a lot of them have a good amount of current. I mean, I'm no scientist, but I understand that. I mean, I've had Class D amplifiers, and I've driven them with my Quad 63s, which are impossible to drive by anything else. So I don't see a problem in the amplifier department. Of course, yes, if you have a Class A amplifier or something like that, it will sound better and it will drive them better.
But we couldn't be 100% sure of that in advance. We were speculating that this would work, but what if it didn't? I mean, your crystal ball isn't always clear enough to say, amplifiers are not going to be a problem.
So basically, it's a little bit of I don't want to say members only, but you have to know what you're doing if you want to buy the speakers. You can't just be some guy who's got something that's not going to really be able to drive them. You have to know what you're doing.
That is correct. Yes.
One thing that's really amazing is that I feel like every part of the speaker is made in-house, pretty much like some of the watchmakers. I noticed because of the connectors and those little flippers that you use to to lift the speaker, they're pretty peculiar. So you make everything in-house, huh?
Well, it's all, virtually all of it is American made. I mean, we don't build every part, but we try to source everything from the US whenever possible. But so it just happens to turn out that, yes, most of the magnets, the steel, the mylar film, yes, virtually everything is, the vast majority of it is, parts are made in the US.
Funny enough, you have a Magnepan right behind you. What a coincidence.
That's a 0.7. We live in a very small townhouse. We could have the bigger models. I could bring home anything I want, but it simply doesn't fit in this this very, very small townhouse. So I can do all my serious listening at Magnepan. It's not a problem.
Yes, well, again, I also don't think it's a big problem to place them, although upstairs my room is very echoey, and I did have an issue there. And in this room, which is a little big, I feel like I could use bigger Magnepans. But in my music studio, where I have a wall full of records, if I put them against those records, they actually sounded great. And they were not too far apart, but I think because of the records were absorbing the back energy, the imaging was fantastic. I think they sounded.
Well, I think that's a natural diffuser. What I found, I had a unique experience. Glenn and I covered all of North America. We visited all the dealers in North America with the 30.7. And this was, I'd always knew that diffusers are important. We've all, most of us have experienced working with absorption. Too much absorption is a problem. What was really revelation to me was hearing 30.7 in 63 different environments. And common theme, I've heard them with $12,000 speaker cables and all kinds of electronics. But one consistent thing, the rooms that sounded best had a lot of diffusers. Yes. So your record collection is acting as a combination absorption, but a lot of it really is also a diffuser. So that's the way to go. Lots of diffusers.
I was really impressed because nobody expects him to sound good in a small room. But then again, these are not made for large rooms. That's why you have bigger Magnepans for bigger rooms.
Small speakers, small room. That isn't the issue.
The absorption is
The
the
large speakers. Ideally, we would like the perfect line source. A perfect line source would look like a pole,
Yes.
about an inch in diameter, and go from the floor to the ceiling. And the way that radiates the sound into the room gives you the most even dispersion of energy, and that's called power response. Where the energy is, if you measure 1,000 different points in the room, the energy is as close to being the same as possible. So the little speaker has a very small line source. You should try stacking two LRS on top of each other. It would look ridiculous, but the sound, when you do that, when you go all the way to the ceiling with line source, it gives you the power response, and it's quite amazing. So the bigger speakers have a taller line source, but most of that area is for bass radiation, so you can get deeper response. The LRS does not have the power response of the big speakers. This is an appetizer. The chef uses his best ingredients, but he wants you to still order the entree. So that's the idea. Give them a little taste, but don't give them the full meal.
Well, that's exactly what happened with my quad 57s. I went to David Chesky's house and I heard his 57s and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And if I've never heard quads and I heard these, I probably would have even known the difference. I'm sure, they are very, very appetizing indeed. But I have to say, you were talking about stacking the LRSs. They are 4 feet tall and they do present a humongous image. I don't think you need anything else in a small room.
Some years ago, I did a demonstration of the 0.7. I stacked 0.7s. So it literally went from floor to ceiling. And I put it all, because I made this structure out of 2x4s. It was very crude. I put it all behind a scrim cloth. So you were forced to just listen to the sound instead of looking at this strange contraption.
Right.
And it was startling what stacked 0.7s or any speaker that went floor to ceiling, what that could do, especially for an orchestra or anything that required power response. I remember many years ago, Jim Winey stacked a pair of SMGs, and Dave Gordon, who's now at Audio Research, we were shocked because, hey, it's just a Volkswagen. It's 0 to 60 is not that great, but it was like, wow, why does that sound so good? Well, that was an experience in terms of what power response can do for a speaker that is inherently compromised. It has to be compromised for that price point. So now, did I tempt you to get out some plywood and 2x4s and stack a pair of LRS?
I don't need to. I'm very happy. Plus the fact that you basically have a natural line array with this tweeter, because it's a long ribbon tweeter, and it's so much better than you don't suffer from the comb filtering effect that you would have if you had multiple tweeters on a tower or something like that. So I'm very happy with the imaging, with the detail.
Because obviously I'm messing with you. I'm an inventor. I would like to try different things, and if you had a wood shop and could build something, I'd send you another pair just so you could hear it.
Well, in my channel, we do have some projects. I have a Garage 301 here that we're working on rebuilding. And we are thinking of making an open baffle speaker for mono, just a very simple open baffle that we will all talk about. And I'm sourcing different drivers, and well, it's so hard. It's so hard to do that. I have a friend that does wood work, and so we're thinking of making something small,
Yeah.
but never going to be like anything like this. That's for sure.
Well, it's fun to play with toys.
That's for sure. That's why we're doing. We could be doing much worse.
Yes. Yeah.
Stay out of trouble. There is a rumored flagship coming. You do have something in the works that you said may be related to the LRS, or the LRS may have something in common, some DNA properties.
The idea to make a high-end speaker for people that had condos or small apartments where they want the best possible sound, but they can't put a big dipole speaker in it. So we've got this concept in the works, and that's that will compete with the 20.7 and 30.7 for people that just don't have much space.
So you're saying that it's something going to be that much narrower than the usual Magnepan?
Yes. In fact, we're going to, Glenn and I will want to have a pair in our home because we've had a prototype in here and it works great. 12 inches wide, 6 feet tall. Well, there's it's crowded on the right channel is not a problem, but the left channel, there's just no space, but we can drop a narrow line source in between the furniture on the left channel. And we had a prototype here and it was amazing. Again, what a tall line source can do in a small space.
Wow, that's even narrow. I mean, that's 1 foot. That's even narrower than the LRS. The LRS is like 14 inches wide. So it's going to be a Maggie that doesn't look like a Maggie.
That's correct. The issue, well, no, it'll look like a magneplaner. The issue is how do you reproduce bass in a small space? It's got to be a dipole woofer. So we've got.
Nonetheless, it would be a woofer, right? Like a round woofer, maybe.
It will use dynamic drivers as open. Open baffle woofers are not a new idea. But Steve Gutenberg and he heard this when we did the demonstration in New Jersey, and we took this on a public focus group tour to see what the press, the dealers, and the consumers thought of this concept. So it got us a very strong approval. Now we're getting started on it.
So it is a flagship that's on prototype stage.
Correct. Well, it's beyond prototype stage. Now we're designing to make it an actual product. And I planned, Glenn and I will probably take this on a tour once it's ready. It'll be after the pandemic. But we'll take this over into Canada and all over the US and show it once it's a real product.
Before we go, I want to ask you, what is the shelf life for drivers on a Magnepan, let's say for someone who decided to buy them and lives in a high humidity place, for example? Will they work, and how long will they work for? Is that something that can be predicted, or is it just up to many other factors?
Well, in a climate, in the right climate, we have speakers that come back for service that go all the way back to the 70s, and they're working fine. There has been issues with the adhesives. The first adhesive we used was sensitive to ultraviolet, and then we did some development, got an adhesive that conquered the ultraviolet problem, but it had issues with moisture in the high humidity areas. Since 2005, we have a new generation of adhesives that has been very reliable. So how long now? If it's high humidity or along the coast where there's salt or pollution, that does affect the longevity. So we can't really say what under adverse conditions, what the total lifespan would be.
And in terms of ruggedness against abuse, I mean, the speaker has a fuse. So have you seen cases where somebody actually managed to destroy them by overdriving them or something like that?
Yeah, replacing the fuse with a copper slug. Some audiophiles do that. They bypass the fuse. But if you the mid-range and tweeter is the only part that's fused, because the bass section can handle a large amplifier. It will slap against the diaphragm. The diaphragm will slap against the magnets if you put too much power on it. So it doesn't need fuse protection on the bass. But the mid-range and tweeter should have the correct fuse, and if you do that, you won't damage them. You'll blow the fuse, but you won't damage the speaker.
Just don't put a jumper on the fuse. That's all, right? That's safe.
Some audiophiles will do that.
Yeah. Well, I was reading Mike Trey's review, a wonderful review, and also Herb Bracker's review, and I spoke to Steve Gothenberg, and they all told me that I should really try to tilt them, tow them in a very exaggerated fashion, so I could get the best imaging and the most precision. I think it worked, but even I think Steve said also like maybe offsetting one of the tweeters. Does that sound familiar?
Well, we state that on the website that measuring from the end of your nose, the tweeter should be 1 inch further than the bass section.
Okay.
Don't confuse it. People get confused when they think angles. So think distance. Now, when you put the tweeters on the inside, the image specificity is better, but at a cost. The sweet spot is smaller. Now, if you put the tweeters on the outside, the sweet spot is very large, but image specificity is not as good. So you can't have it both ways. So which one do you prefer? So what they're probably, do you have the tweeters? I can't tell from here, but the tweeters on the
outside. I haven't even tried it on the outside. I thought, what about the tonality? Does the tonality changes if I put the tweeters on the outside? I'm going to do that, I guess. I'm going to try.
Well, not the tonality, the sweet spot. The compromise is image specificity or big sweet spot. Now, one person, you don't care if the sweet spot isn't large, but you're obviously more impressed with the image specificity. For myself and Galena, I don't sit in one spot and listen like I used to. So we like to have the music on. I would like it to sound like we're at Orchestra Hall,
Right.
but I want the ability to move around, and that the large sweet spot is more important to me than image specificity.
I'm glad to hear that you listen to classical music. You know, I myself, as you know, I'm a classical musician, and I believe these speakers are just perfect for orchestral music. So, do you guys go see the Minesotta Orchestra?
We do, and we sit in Jim Winey's seat, which is 11th row, a little bit to the right, because we wanted to hear the orchestra as Jim designed the speakers. And we take, on our tour of North America, we took a reference recording. Dr. Johnson made a recording in Orchestra Hall. And so once we look at it on the spectrum analyzer, see if there's any serious problems, then we would put on this recording. Is it real? Do we feel transported to Orchestra Hall? Not all the time.
It's impossible.
Sometimes you cannot fix a bad room. You know, if some rooms, as you know, the energy what is arriving at your ear is energy that sound that has come off of the walls. And if it's bad, it can't fix the 50% that is direct radiation or whatever that percentage is. So sometimes we just like, ooh, boy, they sure sounded good in Vancouver. The people in, well, you know, the audiophiles when they came to the event, they can recognize that this room is not great stuff.
Yeah.
So they allowed for what the room conditions, and you could kind of hear past what the room was doing to the sound and what the speaker was capable of. But rooms are, you know, you can't fix a bad room.
Most people don't realize that when they're listening to music and they complain about the speakers or they feel like upgrading, they've never really heard the speakers.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. Yeah, put some. They would be better off getting diffusers, whether natural diffusers like your record collection or something that will acoustically treat the room. They would be better off doing that than buying more expensive equipment.
Well, it's kind of like when people get divorced and the man and the woman, they start going to the gym because they're going to start dating. And then suddenly they both look great. maybe if they started working out before.
Hey, girl, I'm not going to touch that.
Very good, very wise. It sounds like someone who's been happily married for a long time. Thank you so much, Wendell, for your time. I know that you're a busy man and really enjoy the speakers. And I just wanted to have a little more information from you. I hope that they get a chance to buy them someday.
Yes, our apologies for the delay, but we are overwhelmed. You can't just go out and hire more. We're trying to increase production. We're hiring people, but that actually slows you down because you have to train them. You have to make sure they build the speaker correctly. That actually, in the short term, that hurts your production efficiency. So it's we're just got this pleasant surprise that the demand is far greater than what we ever expected.
That's a good problem to have.
We're working on it.
Thank you so much. My regards to Galina, and have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.